You're just the help, sweetheart. Keep your head down. Kira Brennan moved through the Pentagon corridor with practiced invisibility, pouring coffee, replacing thermoses, wiping the stainless steel counter until her hands memorized the motion. At 28, she carried 6 years of combat in her bones, Joint Terminal Attack Controller with the 75th Ranger Regiment. 47 danger close strikes called while rounds zipped overhead, but her name tag said none of that. Black slacks, a white button-down, an unremarkable badge, the uniform of someone who existed between rooms and never interrupted the important conversations. The officers passed, crisp and oblivious, until a tall man with gray at his temples entered, and the room shifted toward him. Rear Admiral Haynes moved with the kind of authority that rearranged posture. He opened his folder, scanned the table, and when his gaze dropped to the coffee cart, it stopped like it had hit a wall. He looked at Kira long enough for the room to notice. Then he said 2 words that tightened the air, Reaper 6. The sound of her call sign in that voice made strangers in suits look up and check their mental maps. A colonel fumbled for an excuse. A major squinted. Haynes read a line from the folder as if the paper confirmed what his eyes had seen. Staff Sergeant Brennan, 75th Ranger Regiment, 3 deployments, 47 strikes, 0 incidents. The room went quiet and a dozen assumptions unraveled. No one had expected this. Kira had expected to be invisible long enough to avoid questions she would rather not answer. Civilian life had been a ledger of mismatched qualifications. A GBU 38 danger close under fire didn't translate neatly to HR speak. She'd taken the contractor job because it paid the rent in Arlington and kept her top-secret SCI clearance active. It was easier to move crowds with a tray than to explain what terminal control meant to people who had never been shot at. But Haynes didn't let her remain small. He tapped a chair. "Sit," he said. She sat. Her palms stayed folded in her lap. The room smelled of coffee and floor polish. Slides with satellite imagery clicked up on the wall. Red circles, blue dots, a terrain that ate helicopters and made a landing almost impossible. A special operations detachment 12 hours into recon had been compromised and was being encircled. The JTAC embedded with the team was down. Time was the enemy in every direction. Overhead assets could be tasked, someone offered, but the terrain made remote targeting dangerously imprecise. They needed someone who could keep a cool radio voice while everything on the screen screamed otherwise. Haynes looked at Kira. He did not ask if she was willing. He asked if she could do it. Years of training and a dozen rehearsed checklists condensed into a single steady answer, yes. Her voice found its tone like a tool found its groove. She was 14 months out of uniform. She had not touched a laser designator in over a year, but she still knew the language of targeting. She remembered the first strike she called at 22, a machine-gunned platoon pinned to a dirt road, a compound 200 meters away, the pilot waiting on her confirmation. She remembered the clean release, the way the world snapped back into order for the platoon after the impact. That memory did not rust. Haynes authorized emergency terminal control. Paperwork would follow. For the moment, the job had to be done. Kira moved to a terminal in the operations center and threaded a headset over her ears. Live drone feeds filled the screens, infrared strobe blinking where friendly boots were hunkered down, shadowed movement along ridge lines where enemy elements closed in. Wind, elevation, grid coordinates. The math rose in her head the way a familiar melody does. She keyed the mic and slid back into the cadence of radios. Reaper 6, this is Gunslinger 21, flight of 2 F-16s, standing by for tasking, the pilot said. Kira's fingers hovered for a heartbeat, then began the 9-line brief with the precision of someone who had rehearsed under fire. She read location, elevation, target description, friendlies offset by 150 north, egress, attack heading. The pilots confirmed each line. The pod on the lead jet reported a laser spot in sync with the drone designation. She checked the imagery again, verified the angles, and cleared the aircraft hot. The first F-16 rolled in on a western heading. The GBU-12 released, guided by a steady laser. Dust roared up and the ridgeline slammed into silence. Kira ordered a re-attack on a northern cluster. The second jet complied. 2 clean strikes later, enemy movement stalled long enough for low and fast high-lows to thread a path into the extraction point. The team went out without casualties. When she finally pulled the headset off, her hands were steady and her pulse had returned to something ordinary. Haynes stood behind her and, without fanfare, said, "That's how it's done." The operations staff debriefed the mission, logged the results, and marked the emergency revalidation. The footage confirmed what her voice had done. Steel on target at the right time. Back in the hallway, the coffee cart waited like an artifact of a different life. Haynes handed her a business card and didn't ask for an answer on the spot. He told her he was forming a training cadre for joint operations coordination and that what she'd just done was exactly the kind of experience they needed. He told her she was wasted pouring coffee and that she'd earned her place at the table. He told her to think about it. She pocketed the card and walked out of the building, feeling the card's weight as if it were an extra coin in her pocket. The transition out of the Army had been a slow, stubborn learning curve. Civilians asked for resumes and HR keywords. Recruiters wanted leadership without examples that mattered under fire. Kira took what she could get while keeping the clearance current and the muscle memory intact. She'd grown up in eastern Montana, the daughter of a smoke jumper and a county dispatcher, taught to read wind and terrain, and to talk people through their worst moments. Those lessons, land navigation with a map and compass, steady radio calls, the ability to do complex math while everything around you burned, had been her childhood and her training ground. They had carried her through deployments to Helmand, Kandahar, Nangar. They carried her through nights when an Apache's rotors were the only sound between life and death. Standing there in civilian clothes, watched by men who only moments before had assumed she belonged behind a cart, Kira felt both exposed and visible in a way she had not let herself be since leaving the service. The card went into her pocket and she thought of her parents, the father who read a burned forest as a map of possibilities, the mother who could keep callers steady on the worst day of their lives. She thought of every call she'd made, every target walked in and cleared, every time a pilot thanked her over the radio afterward in a voice that had stopped trembling. 3 days later, she called the number on the card. She said yes. The work that mattered found her again, and this time the room that had once overlooked her would have to make room. She had been pouring coffee that morning. By nightfall, she had rewritten the expectation of what a support role could contain. The badge on her chest still read nothing about the 60-pound radio, the laser designator, or the nights of sleep lost to the drone feeds. It did not need to. The men and women who had been saved that day knew. The pilots knew. Haynes knew. Kira Brennan knew. And when she answered that call to teach and to return, she stepped into a role she had already been living in practice for years. The coffee cart stayed where it was, but the hallway felt different now. Smaller somehow, in comparison to the space she'd reclaimed.